so much for being here with us today. My name's Callie. I work for Compassionate Sheffield, and we're the team behind the Sheffield Life Loss and Death Festival. So today's event, Supporting Ourselves and Others Through Baby Loss, is part of the wider Sheffield Life Loss and Death Festival, which takes place throughout May. The aim of the festival is to create spaces like this one where people can come together to learn and to share and find out different things that will help us grow our confidence in supporting ourselves and each other. So yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm just going to talk through a few different things while we wait for everybody to join us before we get started. And we're really grateful to be joined by Dr. Laura Francis today, who's with us to share her expert knowledge around this really important subject. So one thing I want to quickly mention before we get started is that if you would like to have live captions on, you can turn those on now. If you click on the three dots at the top of your screen, there should be an option to click language and speech, and then you'll be able to turn on live captions from there. I think that's sort of everybody from the waiting room, which is brill. Laura, are you okay to just move on to the next slide for me? Thank you. So Laura will be giving us an overview of what today's session will include in a moment. But just before we get started, just a couple of notes really. So firstly, just to acknowledge that the content of today's session is around baby loss, and it can be an emotive subject. So I wanted to just take a moment really to acknowledge that and to say it's really important, I think, to take care of yourself and be mindful of any feelings that it might bring up for you as we go through the session today. If it ever feels, like it is just a bit too much or a little bit too emotive for you, please, take care of yourself, step away, have a breather. And also we are recording today's session, which means if it does feel like too much at any point and you need to leave, you are very, very welcome to leave. And you have the option to watch the session back at a different time instead. There's a space at the end of the session today to ask Laura your questions. And I want to, I suppose, really encourage you to share questions that might feel hard to ask in other spaces. It's a bit of a cliche, but there's no such thing as a silly question. And, there's no, in this space, there's no such thing as a question that's, too awkward or taboo, because the chances are someone else might have the same question that you're desperate to ask. So please feel free to share your questions with us. You can share your questions using the Q&A feature throughout today's session. And then at the end, I'll be asking those questions to Laura on your behalf. If there's any questions that don't get answered, please don't worry. Laura's really kindly offered to answer any questions that maybe we don't get round to at a later date in an email that we will send everyone with the slides and the recording as well. And then last but not least, at the end of today's session, I'm going to ask everyone if you might be able to share some feedback with us about the session. Feedback's really, really helpful for us because it helps us learn if this has been helpful. We'll be able to deliver other sort of future sessions or similar sessions, as well as learning what we can do better and what would be helpful for people in the future. So I'm gonna hand over to Laura now.
Great, thanks so much, Callie. Hi everyone, I'm Laura. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in Sheffield in the Birth and Mind Service, which is supporting people, women and birthing people with difficulties around birth trauma, baby loss and tocophobia, which is fear of childbirth. I've been doing that for a little while now, and before I worked in Sheffield, I was working in the Leicester team. So as I say, I'm going to be talking to you a bit today about baby loss and how we support ourselves and others. And I suppose I'm aware that there are lots of people here who will have all sorts of different stories, come from different kind of places. And I guess one of the things, like Callie has talked about, is that we just want to be thinking carefully about looking after ourselves. I suppose my own experiences of grief tell me that sometimes it catches us by surprise a bit and we sort of think we're okay and something comes up and we're not expecting it. So please, yeah, do look after yourself. And if you've experienced a loss, I just want to let you know that we're holding the babies that we've lost in mind during this session. And I've got a little candle that I've got lit next to my screen. And I tend to do that when I'm thinking and doing sessions about baby loss as a way to hold them in mind and remember them. So today, the focus of our session will be kind of divided into a couple of different sections, and I hope that those things will feel helpful for you. So the first section will just be about what do we mean when we talk about baby loss, which, you know, for lots of you may feel really obvious, but I think sometimes, well, it will become clear what I mean. But I suppose there are certain aspects of baby loss that get a little bit talked about in society and some that don't so much. And we just want to make sure that we kind of have a shared understanding of what that might mean. Then we're going to have a bit of a think about like what you might expect after a baby loss in terms of sort of responses to that, how to support yourself or a loved one who's had a baby loss, and where to go for additional support. And then we'll have some time for questions. And I guess just to say, although Callie has very generously called me an expert, I feel that no one's ever really an expert in any of this stuff. We're all kind of just learning and working it out. And I suppose I come from a place of feeling that the main thing is that I think we need to talk more about baby loss. It's something that doesn't get spoken about very much in society, and it definitely doesn't mean that I have all the answers or I know all the things. I don't. But I do feel that it's important that we talk about it. So I really hope that you find the session helpful, and I would, yeah, I'd really appreciate hearing your feedback and, you know, what works, kind of what's been helpful for you. So starting off with, what do we mean when we talk about baby loss? So as said, the first thing to talk about is the fact that we don't talk about baby loss in our society in general. We don't really talk about death, and I love the fact that this festival exists. And in a way, baby loss is often the taboo within the taboo. So when we're thinking about baby loss, because it's not talked about, it can often feel a very lonely experience. And women and birthing people that I've worked with who've experienced baby loss of all kinds often talk about how isolating it feels because it's just not really spoken about. And that's surprising in a lot of ways because about 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a loss. So it impacts a huge number of people. And often when we have a loss ourselves, what we find out is that actually there are a lot of other people that we know who've maybe had a loss and we didn't even know. So there are lots of different types of baby loss. And often when we hear baby loss spoken about, we hear terms like miscarriage, stillbirth. They're the kind of two that get spoken about the most. But actually there are a huge variety of different types of baby loss, and some of them kind of have more stigma or taboo attached to them than others, and can make people feel even more that it's difficult to speak about that. So you can see kind of the list on the screen that I've put up, but you know, we've got things like chemical pregnancies, molar pregnancies, ectopic pregnancies. So there's all sorts of different types. And often there can be stigma around termination as well, whether that's for medical reasons or not. And I guess one of the key things that the messages, one of the key messages that I would always want people to know is that there is no grief hierarchy. And that, what I mean by this is that sometimes when we have a loss, the first question that we're asked is, oh, well, how many weeks were you? Or, you know, or how many pregnancies have you had? You know, as though the number of weeks it was, or, you know, what our experience was, puts like a value on the grief that we're experiencing. And when we have a baby loss of any kind, it's a loss. And, you know, generally, as soon as we find out we're pregnant, you know, and we've worked out our due date, we have an imagined future. And so that loss is a loss for us. And there's no, our experiences of loss can be different depending on kind of the circumstances and the time and our experiences of it. And I'm not taking away from that. It definitely can be different. But I suppose my feeling is that it's really important that we don't see it as some losses being worse than others when we're thinking about them. So this next section is, I guess, talking a little bit about what we might expect after a baby loss. And that's not the physical expectations, that's to do with kind of our emotional response. So I guess in my time working in this area, I've collected kind of lots of different ways that people have responded in terms of sort of anecdotal stories, but I've also done some research in this area and focus groups, and so that's kind of where this kind of list that you're about to see is going to come from. So before we go into that, just to say everyone's experience of loss is different, and there isn't a right or a wrong way to feel, and sometimes I think we can feel a little bit pushed into either kind of feeling a certain way or that we should be over it at a certain point. You know, people say, oh, well, you know, that was like 6 months ago or a year ago, or, oh, well, you're pregnant again, as though those things kind of mean that the loss, I don't know, that it almost like it doesn't matter anymore, or that we should be beyond it. So some of the things that people have talked to me about in terms of how they felt after baby loss are feeling sad and low, having self-critical thoughts, feeling really tired and exhausted, feeling as though you've got sort of nothing left in you, blaming yourself or your body for what's happened, going over all the what ifs. This is a really big one. Lots of people that I talk to say, oh, well, what if I'd done this, or what if I'd done this, or maybe it happened because I did this thing, or maybe this, you know, and people kind of, what our brains do when something happens that is traumatic and difficult is our brains are little problem solving machines. They want an answer. And really sadly, often with pregnancy and baby loss, there often isn't an answer. And even when we go through sort of post-mortem investigations and things, lots of those we know come back and it's slightly inconclusive, or we're not really sure. And when we don't have an answer, or even when we do have an answer, sometimes it still doesn't feel it gives us the full picture. And so what our brain does is it goes into this mode of like trying to figure it out, trying to problem solve and work it out. And when we don't have anything external that we can kind of pin that on, where we can say, oh, what is this thing? What we naturally do is we turn that in on ourselves and we think, well, it must be something I did. It must be something my body did. It must be something that I, you know, a medication I was taking, or a food that I ate, or an exercise that I was doing. You know, I've heard all sorts of people kind of say, oh, well, it must be this thing. And that is a normal response. That's because we want a reason. But it can also kind of get us really stuck in blaming ourselves. Lots of people talk about kind of crying on and off, which is a very normal grief response, feeling angry, potentially like at yourself, at the hospital, at care that you received, feeling a loss of control, feeling numb, feeling disconnected from other people. I think baby loss is one of those things that we have the loss that we've experienced, and then unfortunately we have what I would call secondary losses. So sometimes that can be the loss of kind of certain friendships or beliefs that we have about how other people might respond, and it can be really difficult when people that we value and our friends and we love and care about don't respond in the way that we would hope them to, and that can lead to a feeling of disconnection where we think, I thought we were really close and you don't seem to get it, or and then sometimes other people who maybe you weren't so close to surprise you, and they do show up for you in a way that's helpful and needed. So there are other losses as well that happen around baby loss. Sometimes we can go over kind of regretting decisions that we made or didn't make. Often when we have a baby loss, there are choices that we have to make, often quite quickly, and in a context where we're completely in shock and overwhelmed, and we have to make quite sort of quick decisions about how we're behaving and what we're doing and what's happening. And sometimes as time goes on, we look back and feel that we regret some of those decisions, or that we wish we'd made different ones, and that can be hard. There can also be like difficulties around sleeping, where it's really difficult to get to sleep, or when you're asleep, people talk about having nightmares, and sometimes we think that when we have a difficult experience, that nightmares that we have would be directly linked to what happened. But lots of people I talk to, they start having kind of bad dreams, or they don't even remember their dream, but they wake up with a sense of kind of panic or anxiety, or their dreams feel completely random and not kind of connected. But actually, dreams are a way of our brain trying to make sense of things that basically don't really make sense. And so it can be really difficult as well to sort of manage some of that when we just keep waking up in the night. And what we know is that, well, it's the obvious thing, isn't it? We're having a tough time, and then we're not sleeping well, so we're really tired. And maybe it's not the same for you, but I know if I don't sleep very well, I tend to be quite a bit more grumpy. So it just, not sleeping well then impacts us and makes all of the feelings around the grief feel even more difficult to tolerate and manage. And the other thing people talk about is it's quite normal to sort of want to keep busy, because we do this as a sort of bit of a protective strategy around trying to protect ourselves and manage some of the difficulties that are happening. So what we do is we go through our day, we get up, we sort of keep busy, and we try to just do things, even small things, but everything. When you've experienced a baby loss, you're already at full capacity, so everything you do is taking you over your capacity, but you're sort of keeping busy, trying not to think too much. And then we go to bed at night, and then we're like, well, why is my brain like just whirring, and all these thoughts are like going round and round, and then we can't get to sleep. And I suppose one of the things that I would always talk about around this is the importance of turning towards and turning away. And in the same way that, if the sun, like today, is up in the sky, you can't just stare at the sun because you go blind. When we have a loss, we can't just think about it and sort of stare at it all the time. We have to give ourselves a break, and we have to have that kind of turning towards and turning away. So times when we do think about it, and we allow ourselves to do whatever we need, whether that's just kind of allowing our brain to kind of have some of those worrying thoughts, or to cry, or write stuff down, whatever it is that would be helpful for you, but having some time where we allow ourselves to focus on it, and then giving ourselves a break and going, oh, okay, I've kind of given myself half an hour, maybe even just 5 minutes, of looking at it, and now I'm just gonna have a bit of a break and, I don't know, watch something trash on TV, Married at First Sight or something. I'm giving away my embarrassing secrets there. But like, it's something about giving ourselves a break and allowing that space to give our brain a rest, not to have to focus on it, because it's exhausting when we think about it. But if we turn away for the whole day and we don't make time to look at it, what happens is that when we get to bedtime and we're trying to sleep, our brain goes, oh, good, finally, great, we can think about all of the things. So it's something about, if you imagine that all that stuff is kind of there, you're holding it in your mind and your body, and it's just about like releasing that tap a little bit at a time to allow ourselves to think about it a bit, and then turn the tap off and have a little break. But if we leave it all day, it's a bit like the floodgates kind of open at night, and it can make it difficult to sleep. So it's just about kind of looking after yourself and thinking like, how do I do that? And some people find it helpful to look towards in a kind of time on their own where they spend time alone thinking about it. And some people find it helpful to be with others, like somebody that they love or trust who can be with them to help them with that time of thinking about it. So some people find it really difficult leaving their house. When we have a loss, like especially the first time we have a loss, it basically shatters all of our assumptions about the world and our beliefs about things. You know, probably wrongly, actually, we often grow up with this belief that we have control and we can make decisions and we get to decide what happens to us. And so, you know, I speak to so many people, and I was probably one of them too, where I just thought that, you know, I would, if I wanted to have a baby, great, oh, I'm ready to have a baby now. And, you know, a fertility journey isn't always that simple. You know, we sort of think, oh, well, like I'm choosing to have a baby now, and that can be tricky. But then sometimes we get pregnant and we think, oh, great, I'm pregnant. And that first pregnancy, we have that naivety about believing most of the time, for most of us, we believe it's going to be okay. And so if it's not, that kind of shatters all of that. And it means that it can feel difficult for that reason to believe that, well, that pregnancy wasn't then how I expected and didn't go to plan and didn't feel. So what does that mean? Like, does that mean that the world isn't very safe, or that, you know, that I'm not able to kind of keep a baby safe in my body? And what does that say about me? And so those things can feel really difficult. And that can actually mean that sometimes leaving the house feels difficult because the world then somehow feels a bit unsafe. Everything suddenly feels like it's been turned on its head. And I don't know what's true anymore, or what to believe about any of this stuff. And sometimes it's really difficult to leave the house because the weather's rubbish, or because you're just so tired, or because you can't face going out and seeing people smiling, and everywhere you go there's people with babies or are pregnant. And when we have a loss, one of the most painful things, I think, is that the world seems to just carry on completely unknowing that everything in our world has changed. And that's a really difficult place to be. And it feels really lonely because it's weird, isn't it, when everything's blown up in your life and then everyone else is just oblivious. So that can mean that can feel really difficult. Sometimes when we've had a loss, we can have a really strong kind of sense of like really wanting to be pregnant again, or really dreading being pregnant again, and anything in between. But I guess what I mean by that is that feelings about being pregnant again can be complicated. We can have like quite sort of those niggly worries about like, what does this mean for me in terms of like future pregnancies, in terms of my fertility, in terms of like depending what your age is, in terms of genetics, all sorts of things. Like lots of worries can creep in. It can mean that we avoid intimacy with our partners. We might find it hard to see or be around pregnant women and babies. And suddenly they just seem to be everywhere more than ever before. It can be really difficult having to explain what's happened to other people, and that can feel quite exhausting, and especially when we don't quite know how other people might respond. And also we know like people say unhelpful things, even if they don't really mean to, they sort of do sometimes. And sometimes, you know, in extreme examples, people talk about having feelings of no longer wanting to live. And sometimes that's not about having thoughts about wanting to end your life and having like, you know, a plan for that or anything. It's more the sense of, well, my baby has died and I'm their mum and I want to be with them. So what I would say about that is that some of those thoughts are normal. And I think sometimes we worry a lot if we have like a thought about not wanting to be here anymore. And part of me would say, I want to reassure you that if you have those thoughts, lots of people have thoughts about not wanting to be here anymore, particularly after a loss and a bereavement. But it's also something to just kind of keep a bit of an eye on. And if you're worried at all, please do always speak to your GP, or you can call 111. And if you're worried that you can't keep yourself safe and it's an emergency, then call 999. But please do reach out for support if you're feeling, for further support. And we'll talk a bit more about where you can go for support in a bit. But please do reach out for support if that's kind of, feeling overwhelming or intrusive, or that, you're starting to kind of think about like a plan or anything like that. But if you're having more general thoughts about wanting to be with your baby, some of that is also really normal. Other things to consider are your past experiences. So baby loss can come in all sorts of different contexts. Sometimes they can come in the context of a really long fertility journey, which can feel very difficult, or another bereavement that's unconnected. Sometimes I see women who they've lost their mum, for example, and then they've had a baby loss, and it all sort of enhances on itself. Sometimes, all sorts of different things have happened to people in the past, and baby loss can feel kind of intermixed, and another thing on top of all of that can feel a lot. It's also important to talk about discrimination. We know that the experiences of Black and brown people and those from the LGBTQ plus community, people with disabilities, people who don't speak English, people who are refugees and asylum seekers, homeless population, all of these groups and others that I haven't mentioned have much more difficult experiences. And particularly we know from a report called the Embraced Report that that Black women have a much higher risk of baby loss, and so do Asian women as well. So that's not okay. And there is a campaign called Five Times More, which is in place and trying to kind of address some of these issues. But it's important to say that discrimination exists, and we need to be thinking carefully about that, because unfortunately sort of systemic racism and difficulties within NHS services are a problem and need looking at. And if you're somebody who's kind of within one of those groups or identifies connected to that, and you've had a difficult experience, on behalf of the NHS, I'm really sorry for that. And I really hope that in the future that things continue to sort of improve. The other thing that kind of is something to consider is our feelings about our own identity. And what I mean by that is sometimes if we've had a loss and we don't have any other children, we can find it difficult to think about, well, how do I feel about my identity as a mum or as a dad? And everybody feels differently about this, but my general feeling would be that if you have been pregnant and you've carried a baby, then you are a mum, and we are a parent whether our baby is living or not. And it's okay to hold that as part of your identity, if that feels comfortable to you. Something else to think about is religion and culture, and how like loss and childbearing might be understood within different faiths and communities. Sometimes there's quite a strong kind of cultural expectation for people to have another baby quite quickly, or a pressure for people to have lots of children, or to have that having children is a blessing from God. And that can feel quite tricky when you've had a loss. And so sometimes loss can also impact how people kind of participate within different kind of celebrations and rituals within their culture. And that can also feel a little bit difficult and painful sometimes. And also the other thing to consider is partners and families. So maternity services, NHS services around pregnancy, and baby loss and all of that stuff are generally focused towards the woman or birthing person. And partners can often feel on the outside of that. So you know, we also want to be thinking carefully about how do we support partners and their families who've had experiences of baby loss. So yeah, something to consider. So just moving on to how to look after yourself or a loved one, put together a few kind of key things. And initially, I would say that the main thing is focus on the basics, because, like I said, whoever has had the loss, whether it's you or a loved one, they will already be at capacity. They can't, you just don't have space in your body for any more things. So supporting somebody to focus on the basics is really helpful. And that is things like eating regular meals, having enough water to drink, taking prescribed medication, allowing yourself to rest, getting outside if you can, reaching out to someone, and being kind to yourself. So in terms of if you are somebody who's looking to support somebody who's had a baby loss, some of the things that I've spoken to women and birthing people about that like people find helpful are when people bring them round food, but with no expectation, no like coming in or needing anything, just an offering of, I've brought you this. Because when you've had a loss and you're grieving, you look in the cupboard and you think, oh, I haven't been to the shop. I don't really know what to eat. I don't really feel hungry. And it's easy to not kind of have any energy to eat, or you have the food and you just think, I don't have the energy to cook this or make something. So bringing someone a meal that's really easy for them is a great gift that we can do that helps someone. If they need medication picking up, offering to go to the pharmacy for them to pick up their medication, inviting them to come out for a walk with you if they would like to, reaching out to them with a text message, and it could be something really simple like thinking of you, feel free to call me if you want to, and encouraging them to be kind to themselves. So a lot of that is about, I suppose, thinking around what would I say to a friend? Because we often aren't even aware of the negative things we say to ourselves. So thinking about, okay, if this had happened to a close friend or family member of mine and they were in that situation, what would I say to them? And then trying to apply that to yourself. And the other thing that I would recommend is just doing a bit of a check-in with yourself. And useful questions that you can ask yourself are, how am I feeling today? Or it might even be, how am I feeling in this 5 minutes? Because when and for people supporting someone who's had a baby loss, don't ask like, how are you? Because it's too broad. How do you answer that question? But like, how are you feeling today? Or how are you feeling, in the past hour? That's the kind of question that we want to be focused on, and particularly in the early stages. And also asking yourself, what do I need? I think sometimes we can feel that we don't want to bother other people, or, it's difficult to ask for things. But actually, often other people want to be able to help in some way or be useful in some way, and they don't really know how. So if you reach out to them and say, please, could you go and do a food shop for me? The person might actually be really delighted because they'll think, oh, phew, like, thank goodness, yes, absolutely, like this is a way I can help. So I would encourage you, if you've had a baby loss, not to feel afraid to ask other people for things. And that can be, there are all sorts of small things that we can ask people to do, and not to be afraid to ask for help with those things, because it just takes a little bit of the load off. And this is a small list, and there's loads of other stuff obviously as well, but some of the things that I would say are kind of top tips when supporting a loved one is, the main thing is just show up for them. And that doesn't mean show up at their house unexpected, to have a long conversation. But it might mean take something round for them that you can drop off with no expectation of kind of having a conversation. Listen to what they're telling you without trying to fix it or give any opinions. And I cannot stress that enough. I think when you've had a loss, it's very, very difficult if somebody else, for probably all the right reasons, but wants to fix it, because when you've had a loss, it can't be fixed. The worst thing has happened. And when people kind of give opinions or say kind of cliched phrases, that can be, like, oh, maybe it wasn't meant to be, or, heaven only takes like the best angels, or maybe it was God's will, or any of these things like are really painful to hear. So when you're listening to somebody who's had a baby loss or pregnancy loss, any kind, the key thing that you can do is just listen. And it's okay to listen and to not respond to what they say. Or you might say, that sounds really hard, I'm so sorry. And if they have named their baby, which some people have and some people haven't, depending kind of where they're at with that and what stage it is, but say their baby's name. Because when we have children, like, people often ask about your kids, or you naturally talk about them and say their name. And when we have a baby loss, we often don't get the opportunity to say that baby's name. And so it's meaningful and important when other people use their name. So use their name, talk about them. And, I think it's really important at this point to say that we all get it wrong sometimes. I get it wrong. And you may have listened to what I've said so far, and there might be things that I've said that you thought, oof, Laura, that's not quite worked for me, or I don't agree with that. And if that's the case, I'm really sorry. And it's okay to get it wrong, and we just need to then say sorry. And sometimes we can, we get so worried about getting it wrong or saying the wrong thing that we actually avoid people who've had a loss, and that doesn't help them. That makes them feel more alone. And so if you're kind of feeling like, oh, I don't quite know how to approach this, it's okay to start with, I want to be here for you, and I want to say in ahead of time, if I say something that and I get it wrong, or I don't say the right thing, I'm so sorry. But I want to listen to you and I want to be here for you. So we might get it wrong sometimes. But actually, like, what people tell me is that what they need is for people to show up. They don't need them to get it right all the time. They just need to be open to listening and saying sorry if they get it wrong. As we've said, it's about asking, like, how are you today, rather than a more general question. Putting in your diary the dates of, like, important dates, anniversaries, and then sending them a message on those days, checking in on them, writing a birthday card when someone's lost a baby, is really meaningful for lots of people. And lots of people tell me that in the kind of first month or two after a loss, people check in, and then after that, everybody kind of drops away. And when we've had a loss, it doesn't stop hurting after a month or two. And so being a person who kind of checks in, like, at 3 months, at 6 months, when it's the anniversary, who writes a birthday card, who's there for that person, that makes it a real difference for them. And then important to say that pregnancy after loss is really hard. It often brings with it huge anxiety. It can bring with it, like, really difficult feelings around going to scans, due dates, anniversaries. Bringing home a baby can feel really, really anxiety provoking after you've had a loss. So if you are supporting somebody who's had a loss and they're pregnant again, please be aware that no pregnancy takes away from the loss that they've had. No baby replaces another baby. And like that would be ludicrous to think about if it was two children that somebody had. You know, we would never think about it like that. And it's the same when someone's pregnant. So please be aware that if somebody that you care about and love is pregnant after a loss, that will probably be incredibly difficult for them. And it would be really normal if they were feeling really anxious. So kind of coming into land a little bit, but thinking about like where to go for additional support. So there are different NHS services in Sheffield. If you are under the care of the hospital in Sheffield, there is a bereavement services team, and I cannot tell you how lovely they are. They are really thoughtful and kind. They will provide you with support. They will talk to you about options. We have a bereavement midwife who supports people who are under maternity care and have a baby loss. And they're really great people to kind of connect to if you've got questions or you need some support after a loss. We also have the hospital chaplaincy team, who are also absolutely lovely. And they have a space where you can go. They have different chapels where you can go. They provide support for you. They will, you know, pray with you, but they also provide non-religious support as well. There's a can't remember the exact technical term, but I think a humanist chaplain, somebody who's not religious. So these are people who will be with you and listen to you and support you in difficult times. There's also talking therapies, which you can self-refer to, and they have in the Sheffield Talking Therapies, they used to be called IAPT. They have a website and you can go on and self-refer. And in terms of loss, they provide CBT, but they also provide counselling. So it may be that you would find one of those helpful. I am currently setting up a pregnancy loss psychology service, and that is for people who have a loss on gynecology who are under 20 weeks. So women and birthing people are able to access support through that if they've had a loss in gynecology. And then Birth in Mind is the psychology team who support people in Sheffield who have a loss on maternity, which is over 20 weeks. So in the email that is sent out after this with the slides and everything, I'll make sure that there's information about these different services, so you know how to access them, but you'll also be able to contact Callie if you've got any questions, and I'm happy to kind of provide more information if that would be helpful. It's worth saying that the pregnancy loss psychology service I'm setting up is a pilot, and it's only running until, it's only funded currently until June next year. We're hoping for that funding to be increased. So there's not anything online about it at the minute because it's literally a brand new service that I'm setting up. In terms of other places that you can go for support, I cannot recommend enough Lenny's Legacy. There is a new charity, fairly new charity in Sheffield that supports people who've had baby loss and also child bereavement as well. And Mim and Roy run that. They're absolutely brilliant people who've had their own experiences of loss. And they provide, there's groups that you can attend both in person and online. And they also have a postnatal Pilates group for people who've had loss, which is funded through the National Lottery, and a really brilliant scheme. I absolutely recommend looking at their website. And you can also, they've created a blog and talked about some of their experiences, and they're quite active on social media. There's also Freddie's Wish. They're a charity who provides support, and you can access some counselling sessions through them. If you go to their website, you can apply for that. Tommy's is an incredible charity that does lots of research into baby loss and trying to sort of ensure that we look after babies' lives. And there's lots of information on their website which you might find helpful. And they have a phone line that you can call, a support line where you can talk to a midwife, and they have a 5 times more specialist phone line for Black women who've experienced loss, in response partly to the fact that we know that there's increased risk. The Miscarriage Association, also an absolutely brilliant charity. have online support groups, and lots of information on their website, and practical information as well about returning to work and your rights and all sorts of things. And SANS have a special Sheffield group. So SANS, the baby loss charity, and they have a Sheffield group that meets in the city centre regularly if you'd like to attend that. And then the other ones that I've put up here are this charity, I can't quite see that. Actually, I think it's the Children of Jannah, that one, which is a charity for is a Muslim charity, and Sheffield Pregnancy Counselling Support is a Christian charity that supports people, but again, like, are open to supporting anybody. And then ARC is Antenatal Results and Choices, who support people who've had to make difficult decisions around sort of diagnosis in pregnancy. So there's some charities that I've looked into and spoken to people at and would say, but there's lots more that you can access. And again, I will try to put together a comprehensive list that can go out with the email. And one place I would direct you to is Sheffield now has a mental health guide. So if you type in Sheffield Mental Health Guide, it's an online resource, which is a bit like a directory and has just a huge wealth of information about different services that you can access in Sheffield, and where to go for mental health support. And you'll find all of these charities are on the mental health guide. There's a few that I'm kind of discussing with them about updating and adding a few more as well. So hopefully you might find that a helpful place to look. And in terms of, I guess, things that I've looked at, I absolutely love this book, which is called You Are Not Alone by Carrie Lloyd. And she also runs Griefcast, which is a podcast about grief in general, not just about baby loss, but there are baby loss episodes on that. And the book You Are Not Alone, again, is about grief in general, but very applicable to baby loss. And there's a few kind of mentions about it in the book. The Worst Girl Gang Ever is a podcast about pregnancy loss, and Dad's Still Standing is a podcast run by dads who've experienced baby loss. So they're just a couple of examples of things that I've found helpful, but there's a lot of stuff out there that you can look at. So we are coming into land, and if you have any questions, I think Callie's going to kind of have a look, and very happy to answer whatever you would find helpful.
Thank you so much, Laura. So yeah, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. So you can see at the top of your screen, there's like 2 speech bubbles with a question mark in. If you click on that, that's the space where you can type in your question that I'll then share with Laura. But first of all, I think just to say thank you so much, Laura. That was just so much really, really helpful information and guidance. And yeah, it feels really, really important to share that whole different range of experiences that people can have, and really, normalizing that, as well as sharing so many amazing ideas for how we can support people in our lives, and also how we can reach out and access support ourselves. As Laura said, we are going to be sending everybody an email afterwards where we'll be linking to, all the amazing resources, services, podcasts and everything that Laura's mentioned, so that you'll be able to find those. I can see that somebody has their hand up. Would you be okay to just pop your question in the Q&A, please, if that's okay? And Sophia has put a question in the Q&A. She's asked, do we have any support groups who meet in person in Sheffield and South Yorkshire? I know you mentioned a few different services, Laura. Do you know if any of them have support groups?
So Lenny's Legacy have a support group which is for parents in general. I don't have the information in front of me, but they definitely have an in-person support group. SANS have an in-person support group.
Fantastic.
I don't think there are any others. We're a little bit lacking in that. I am in the process of setting up a pregnancy after loss group as part of the service that I'm running, and also hoping to set up some other loss groups as well in the community. So it's sort of hopefully coming, but I definitely would look into Lenny's Legacy and SANS. They're places that you can access in-person support in Sheffield.
Fantastic, thank you. And yeah, what we'll do is we will send everybody the information about the different support groups that SANS and Lenny's Legacy offer, so that can be shared with other people. There is another question in the chat that I'm just going to ask, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
And that's, is there anything that you might be able to recommend in terms of things that maybe workplaces or colleagues might be able to do to support someone that's experiencing or has experienced baby loss?
Yeah, well, great question. So this is something that I feel passionately about. I also sit on the British Psychological Society perinatal faculty as a sort of different role. And what I'm working on at the minute is looking at how we could develop a tool of some kind that would support people to return to work after a pregnancy or baby loss, because we know that that's a really critical time where people often don't feel that their workplace has a policy in place that's effective for supporting people, and that actually that returning to work after a baby loss can be a really difficult point. And so I think there's a lot of work that we need to do around that. And it's a little bit of a side project for me. But I guess I'd be really interested to hear. I'm sort of hoping going forward that I'll be able to set up a focus group where we talk a bit more about this and to co-create ideally a document that people who've had a loss get to own, and they get to, and it's got kind of ideas about questions you might want to ask your employer, thinking about. I think some of the difficulties for workplaces is that they're not set up, and managers aren't really set up in terms of training to think about how they ask people questions or what they need to consider. But I think it's always helpful if workplaces are able to be thinking about, like, what's happened to the person, how much of that do they want to share with their manager, with their colleagues, how do they want their colleagues to know about that? And some of those processes aren't always done very well, and that can make returning to work even more difficult and challenging. So yes, absolutely, we definitely need to be doing more of that. There is some guidance on the Miscarriage Association website. They have created can't remember the exact title of it, but they have a workplace section on their website, and they've published a document about miscarriage in the workplace, which has some helpful information. And Tommy's also have information about baby loss and the workplace. So I'd really recommend looking at those websites. But yeah, hopefully soon we'll have a bit more on that.
Fantastic. That's really helpful, and it's really good to know that there is, guidance and resources out there. Thank you. Somebody's just popped something as well in the Q&A. They've said it's not a question, but a huge thank you. They said they've attended through professional interest, but they had a miscarriage 15 years ago, and their grief is still there. So hugely helpful on a personal level. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I'm really pleased to hear that it's felt helpful. And I think it's important for us to remember that the losses that we have, we carry them with us for our whole lives. I spoke to a lady who's 93 and was telling me about a baby loss that she'd experienced. And, it becomes part of our lives and our stories and who we are. And interestingly, when they've done research, they've found that the babies that we have carried, cells from those babies exist within the bodies of the mum, the person who's carried them for their whole life. And so through our lives, we we hold cells from all of our babies that we've carried, and that grief doesn't go away, it just changes in time. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I never knew that, and that's really lovely, a lovely thing to know, actually. Yeah, thank you. We're towards the end of today's session now, so thank you all so much for being here. I hope you have all found it helpful, and thank you, Laura, for sharing so much with us. If I could please, invite you all to share your thoughts with us after today's session. I think I mentioned at the start that any feedback that you feel able to share is really valuable to us, as it's the feedback that helps us learn what people find really helpful, and it enables us to continue to create spaces like this. The feedback's completely anonymous, and you're welcome to share as much or as little as feels possible for you. It's something that you can do now if you feel able. You can scan the QR code with your phone, or if not, that's absolutely okay. We will be sharing a link to our anonymous feedback form in our follow-up email. When we do send that email to you all, if you have any questions, if you go away from the session today and over the next week or so, if there's any questions that sort of come up for you, you are very welcome to get in touch with us, and we'll do our best to help you answer that question. Similarly, if any of you are keen to sort of connect with Laura after this session, if you get in touch with us at Compassionate Sheffield, you can do so using our email address, which is team@compassionatesheffield.co.uk, and we'll be able to connect you with Laura, and yeah, all our details are on the email you'll have received with today's link. So if we bring the session towards an end there, please take care of yourself after today. Take some time, have a breather if you can, and yeah, hopefully it's been a really helpful session for you today. Thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this session, and we'll hopefully be in touch with you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.